I think I'm experiencing a sugar rush due to the upcoming birthday of Superman. May he become the real Superman, rather than beating enemies around, saving them. And Lex Luthor needs help, not a punch. Yeah. Yeah. So keep buying him Superman shirts. Yeah, he's such a cool guy. Yeah. Yeah. So two more things before I would like to change the direction of the content of our meditation a bit. Um, I have to keep giving, should I say this? I think it's very helpful to approach meditation always from a very um, holistic perspective, to think about it in terms of we are complex beings. And I think often we are too goal-oriented, but also meditating far too narrowly. No, it's like that's always what I thought was the problem with all this mindfulness business. Like mindfulness is one of my 51 mental factors. This is my capacity of my mind to hold on to something. There's more things I can do. And so to think about training in a narrow way undercuts your humanity and is not a successful approach either. Yeah. And so when I look at my own practice, I practice in a broad way. I bring many things together in a single session. There's something in the middle, but there's lots of stuff around, and that's really helpful to consider. So the first, and because we talked about it, the first thing I will always want to emphasize, please practice lots of humor. I can't tell you how healthy that is. If you ever get the opportunity to meditate on your own, you will need lots of it. And most people want to go on their own to a cave or to a jungle. Yeah, good luck to you. I see many people running out of their caves and forests like, oh, no, that's not. We always believe that the enemy is outside, and the enemy is not outside. And we tend to bring that enemy with us. And when you're in your cave or in your forest, there's no escape. And so that's one thing. The other aspect of humor is that humor should never be deprecating. It should be a mother's humor with regard to Superman's. Yeah, and that's an opportune way to think about it, because from that perspective, your mind is in the business of becoming Superman, but it's this little Clark Kent. Yeah, and he can do magical things, but you need to learn him to fly from when he starts to fly across the street to look left first. Yeah, and that is true for our minds as well. It's extraordinary what this phenomenon can do, but it will need some help. And if parents are overbearing to their children or leaving them with them too much freedom, they don't develop well. And so we need to find a middle ground. On the one hand, we need to give our mind a good context. And on the other hand, we should give our mind the space to grow. And so what I meant with humor is never deprecating humor. Is to have a smile on one's face like, my mind will learn. What's happening now is pretty funny. Yeah. Because the moment you do that, there's two things about humor. It's relaxing. And when you look at the body, from a tantric perspective of channels and chakras and so on, what it does is it actually opens everything. The laughter makes the wind move and it relaxes everything inside. So you get a nice, relaxed bodily sense, which is really, really useful. It also relaxes the mind, because in all unfortunate behavior of the mind, there is a profound sense of grasping itself, me, that burden on our shoulders. And so good humor is self-deprecating in a healthy way. It just allows the mind also to let go, to relativize in just a very healthy manner. Microphone, because on Zoom they can't hear you. The microphone is coming your way. Yes. Great socks, by the way.
I apologize for this delay. Just reminds me of this wonderful story, and I do believe it was Karuna who told it one time about how he snuck up outside the window where Lama Zopa and Lama Yeshe were because he wanted to see what they were talking about. And he said, I stayed there for a couple hours, and all they did was laugh and giggle and laugh, and they talk a little, and then they giggle and laugh, and another 15 minutes. So that's what I was thinking.
That's quite true. Well, Tibetans, I must honestly say, also really like humor at your cost. If they find a particular weakness in you, the news about it will travel faster than light. They invented faster than light travel. So the entire monastery will know, and they will wait for you to show it again, because then they can have, I think it might have been, I just mentioned his name, might be mistaken, it might be George Dreyfus, who studied in Sera Monastery very early on. And at one point, he expressed annoyance about the fact that the children in the monastery, everyone wakes up very early, but the children memorize by screaming the text on the top of their voices. Everything, even all the primary school books, they memorize just everything. And so he became quite annoyed by listening to primary school mathematics at the top of a whole bunch of kids' voices. And they were sitting in front of his door on top of that. And at one point, the story went fast around that he didn't like it, and they did everything humanly possible to annoy the hell out of him even more until he gave up on this. This is a good therapeutic way to allow you to give up. Yeah. Yeah. And so humor is very important. An additional aspect that makes that humor healthy, and that is again a very important tantric perspective, is that even our unwholesome emotions contain wisdom. It's our mind trying to do the right thing with the wrong information. Like if the world existed as it appears to us, then anger and desire would make sense. The problem is that the world doesn't exist in that way. So it is defeating. But our mind tries to pursue our well-being. And so when you are sitting, because the text will sometimes read in that way, as though you should meditate in a very judgmental way. And that doing that actually creates dullness. When you continuously judge your mind from being distracted again and so on and so forth, when you are heavy-handed, your mind will seek, and there's something called the 12 links of dependent origination. That is a description of our psychology moving through time. There's something that is very much overlooked, and that is called the desire of non-existence. When you are heavy-handed, your mind will seek to escape you. Like, with you, I can't live. And that is often what we do when we drink alcohol, or when you are depressed, you want to go to bed all the time. Your mind, the judgmentalism about yourself is unbearable, and your mind will try to turn off. And so dullness in meditation can be, there's different reasons for it, but it can be the cause for dullness and lethargy. When it just wants to turn off, does not want to be aware anymore. Because to sit with yourself in that way is just unbearable. Yeah. And that again, that is where and the Metta Sutra, for example, the Buddha requests us to be like mothers, looking at every sentient being as though we are a mother and this is our only child. But when the Buddha says all living beings, what we hear excludes us. But he doesn't. That's a cultural problem. We think altruism is self-negating. And that is also why we don't understand the great master Shantideva, for example, when he talks about exchanging self and others. You should forget about yourself and think only about others. What he means is that you will flourish by it, but it's not what we read. We read that we should take care of others at our expense, and that will be very unhealthy. That's not what he's saying at all. And so that same caring attitude we should have for our body and mind in meditation. So when the mind misbehaves, is to have a motherly, humorful attitude towards it, but that also implies some appreciation. Like, I know you try to pursue my benefit, But this is not the way to go. This is your misunderstanding. Yeah, superficially, distraction seems fun, but just to point out to it by looking and by reasoning that this is not the case, that it's not fun at all, in the end will help your mind change on its own accord. You can't make it do that because that is not the way the relationship that we have. It's truly like a motherly care. You keep pointing out the same thing. This distraction, and you show it. This is not, this is not pleasant. You're not free here. And it will try to do it again. And you just point it out again and again and again until gradually it starts to stop. It starts to see for itself, this is not where I want to go. You can't make it stop. But you can guide the mind into stopping. Yeah. And that takes lots of time. Yeah. And that lots of time is simply the way it is. We have, again, no absolute control. But at the same time, and I've always found that very inspiring to think about. And for me, 20 years on in my monastic life, 40 years on in my Buddhist practice, I needed lots of patience with me and with everything that is in me. Amazing. It was not easy. But at the same time, when I now look back, what has also gifted me is enormous patience. I needed to be very patient with my body and my mind. And so one of the things to consider, what we overlook when we are too goal-oriented, is that even something like being patient with your mind, the fact that your mind will try to do the same thing again and again and again. When we're goal-oriented, we only see what goes wrong. What you overlook is that you could patiently bring your mind back again, and that you're practicing patience and kindness at the same time. That's the problem with goal-oriented meditation. One should always simply meditate with the present and know everything that is in the present. So my mind might be struggling at the moment in my meditation, and there's a very good opportunity to practice insight, to practice patience, to practice kindness. So then calm is not happening maybe today, but the other things are happening. That means that every occasion becomes a door to liberation. And we talk often about the 3 doors of liberation. That is what is always in front of you. And we have a choice what we do with the present. We can judge it. It's not good enough. It should be calmer, blah, blah, blah. But when we do that, it is like screaming at the door. But there's no point screaming at the door. It will not, sesame does not open when you say sesame. I can guarantee you. Yeah. You open it by turning the handle. And that's very important aspect to navigate in meditation. It makes your meditative life so much more rewarding. And even in a session where your mind is complete chaos, because sometimes we all encounter moments that are so overwhelming and so complex and so out of our league that the mind must think a lot it should not, it's not that helpful to be honest, but sometimes it falls back on its illness habits, let's be honest, and sometimes this is just the case. No, then you know that this is the way it is. Then you have many other things to practice. Then you can just sit with that mind. The mind is really upset, so it needs kindness, it needs care, it needs my patience, it needs acknowledgement that it tries to pursue my well-being. It's trying to figure out how to navigate that situation. It's not helpful the way he does it. The motivation is there. And then that is enough. Because it's empowering, because you show the mind its strengths. And then you will find when you do that, the mind actually really calms. So when the mind is already upset, and when you judge it, you tell the mind on top of being upset that it is not good enough. Then it's upset twice. And that is not helpful. The mind is upset because it doesn't trust. And you know now why it doesn't trust, because our perception is untrustworthy. Of course it doesn't trust. If we just double down on that, that's not helpful. So when we do practice patience and kindness and so on, we indicate also to the mind that there are things within that are trustworthy. Like you immediately by doing so, you already offer it an alternative to the worrying that it is doing. And in some cases, for example, an immediate solution is not necessary at all. Sometimes the best solution is to wait, to be patient, and like, this is unpleasant, but that's the way it is. There is no solution for it. So I would just stay with it. Or sometimes the solution is actually just not to want to resolve it in one way or another, just to be kind. Like, this is a mess, but maybe we all just need kindness. Let's not resolve the situation at all. Let's just be kind to everyone, and whatever that goes. It's like this. And that is the way meditation works, because then every moment of your awareness, meditation is not about sitting on a cushion. It's about familiarizing with you're familiarizing yourself with a completely new outlook on what the world really is. And then every moment of your existence becomes meditation. And you learn how to navigate whatever is. Because remember, not accepting the present is already a hindrance. You have already aversion. So to battle aversion with aversion is not helpful. That's doubling down on distraction. So when the mind is upset, when the mind is doing that, then that's the way it is. Then you practice kindness. So far, that makes sense? Yeah. The other thing that I wanted to share with you, which is something very helpful to think about, especially as we talked a little bit about prayers and so on this morning, is that, and it comes in a way back to your question, like what is intent actually? Yeah. And in modern philosophy, very helpfully, when they talk about the content of our awareness, they call it intentional content. And that is exactly the right marker. We don't see the world as it is. Our mind conjures up an image of what it holds, that it is informative to our behavior. Yeah. Just to make sure that you don't forget it, I have a funny story about this. I always forget his name. I even have his book. Sometimes my mind decides that some names are not worthy of remembering. Yeah. It's an American cognitive scientist. There's actually a TED talk by him in which he argues pervasively that our cognition is not biologically made to see the world as it is. It is made for us to survive. That is its purpose. Yeah. That's what it portrays to us. And then he tells a funny story about and I did not come up with the story. So please forgive me. It's a funny story nevertheless. About the Australian brown beetle. Seemingly in Australia, they have huge, all insects in Australia I hear are huge and they are out there to kill you. Yeah. So seemingly there's an enormous brown beetle, and of the males of the brown beetles, they like their women big and brown. Yeah. And he says, then you have Australian human men. And Australian human men like their beer. And the beer in Australia is in big brown bottles. And after having finished that bottle, what do? You chuck it into the outback. But there's an effect that it almost led to the extinction of the brown beetle in Australia, because the beetles massively started to copulate with bottles. To the extent that the Australian law made a law that it is prohibited in Australia to make brown bottles. Yeah. So now you won't forget that fact anymore. Mhm. So in that respect, there's another American there's an American Buddhist psychologist that for that reason argues that evolution causes us to evolution is geared to making us procreate, not to make us happy. And the Dharma is geared towards making us happy and not to make us procreate. And that is an interesting thing to consider. If Mother Nature can make you procreate by making you suffer, it will. It will, because it has no intent for you to be happy. And that is a problem with our awareness. Awareness is constructed on the basis of ignorance, and within that ignorance, we try to do only one thing to keep recreating ourselves. Yeah. And so what it highlights is that what we see when we talk about intentional content is that what we see is already something falling over. Yeah. Yeah. Ghost indeed. And so what we see is already a story. So when you ask yourself, how does intent work? Intent works on the basis of the perception that we have. So we see something in a way that is specifically such that it attracts our intentional behavior. When you look around, you see some things that seem attractive, some that are not, some that are non-interesting. That does not come from the side of the object, that is your mind's doing. On the basis of previous experiences, on the basis of karma, and on the basis of conceptuality, it constructs something. This is not the way the world is. What you're looking at is the content of your mind. No one has ever seen something outside of their mind that is not even plausible. So when you're looking at me, what you're seeing is the content of your mind. You see me as a representation made by you, and that should be taken with a pinch of salt. Why is that so important? At one point, we would really like to see the world as it is, but for the moment, we are stuck with the narrative aspect of our mind. That means that the great power we have is to introduce better narratives. When our narratives are social narratives. These are from our culture. Different cultures see the world in very different ways because they have different stories. And so what is very strange about let's put it differently, an enormous difference between the Asian experience of Buddhism and Western is that we always seem to focus on philosophy. But if you ever spend some time in India or in Thailand or in Burma, you see that they emphasize stories. Now we just end up always studying the fourth tenet schools and whatever you have. But, the best translations that we have from the Jataka stories are from the 1920s. Because now we have this idea that these are myths. Myths are not true. And we miss one of the most fundamental aspects of the entire tradition. These stories matter. They matter a lot because they change our perception in more wholesome ways. The purpose of the Jataka stories, like the prayers, is what makes a book interesting. If you have a book which you can't identify, no, you stop after 10 pages. No, when you read through 10 pages and nothing allows you to identify with one of the characters in the book, you close the book because it tells you nothing. A book is interesting when you lose yourself in one of the characters. No, at one point, and we all know that when you really get absorbed into a book, you're not aware that you're reading anymore. You're looking through someone's eyes and you go through that story. Yeah. That is why they work. And that is what Jataka stories and biographies of great masters and so on and so forth do. When you read them, like recently, and please buy it, Enlightened Vagabond by Mathieu Ricard. About the great 19th century Master Patrul Rinpoche, amazing person, book full of good stories. And you should read the introduction. The way it was made is actually also very nice. And so these stories are so much fun. They're so colorful. They are so delightful that they remain with you. So you read them, you get lost in Patrul Rinpoche, but they stay with you throughout the day. You close the book, but the story doesn't end there. For the rest of the day, you experience your day through the lens of that person's existence. You stay a bit Patrul Rinpoche. I always joke, like the first movie I ever got to see freely on my own by my mother was Star Wars. Yeah, exactly. And you can imagine what my career idea, what my ambition was after that. Jedi, yeah. Before anyone says Darth Vader. Yeah. Happy to see the power of these narratives. That is true because we always use social narratives to make sense of ourselves. No, your self-story is built from cultural stories. And some of these stories are pretty damning. And so the purpose of these Buddhist stories is to provide you with better material to create for the moment a more wholesome self-story. Until at one point in your meditative life, you can give up on all stories altogether because they're no longer necessary, because you know. But for the moment, we don't have so much direct access. So we need stories as a midway. Now, Superman is passing by. Mhm. Not flying at all, by the way. Yeah. So one important aspect of meditative practice is to have you will need to relax. We all do. And Tsongkhapa is actually quite peculiar about this. This is one of the capacities of a meditator is also to know when to rest. And so for the moment, we will need quite a bit of rest. And then it's very helpful to fill these resting moments with good stories, to find biographies and other Buddhist story material that you find inspiring, that tells you something about you. Yeah. Make sense? Yeah. Yeah. There's also Naomi Appleton. I need to look up the, no, I have a paper version. Yeah, I shall find it. By the way, just write down Naomi Appleton and look her up on YouTube. She started a project and I'm delighted by it. She realized the importance of the Jataka stories in the Buddhist tradition, and she started a whole project from Edinburgh University to reinvestigate them. And of the 254 Jataka stories in the Pali tradition, there's 10 of them that supposedly describe the last 10 lives of the Buddha before he became a Buddha. And buy the paper, I mean, you can only buy the paper version, buy the hardcover. It will set you back a bit, but it is full of Thai art because Thai temples are covered wall to wall by Jataka stories. And so it tells the stories both by these stories. They contain good introduction to contextualize them, like what are you reading? Who are all these individuals hanging around in these stories? But it also provides you with imagery, like how do Thai people visualize these stories? Yeah. And these stories, the importance of the stories, that they're not only about the bodhisattva, they're about you. Yeah. This life is one of your jatakas. One day you'll become a Buddha, and you will sit at a crossroad, and your attendant will ask you, like, Lord, why are you sitting on this crossroad? And you will say, well, this crossroad in Santa Fe. And you will say, well, I was here before. Yeah. And this is my story that I have to tell about that moment that I was sitting atop the noble ring. And then someone will write it down and paint it on a wall in some temple in Thailand. Who knows? Yeah. Yeah. So it's very important because it helps you restructure. So even before a meditation session, if you take just 10 minutes or 15 minutes to indulge in one of these stories, and then you sit down, you'll find that your intentionality is guided by these stories because all your other perceptions, then the mind is a causal phenomena. And so it will base the subsequent perceptions that you have on that story, so that the narrative will get wrapped in what you see later on. Yeah. Yeah. And that is really a helpful way to guide your intent without having to fight yourself all the time. Yeah. So far? Yeah, that's pretty obvious. Yes.
Well, you just spoke to something that I was thinking about this morning as I was trying to meditate. And that is that we often just jump in instead of preparing ourselves.
Exactly.
And what you just said was just exactly right.
Yes. Yes.
And I think it's a big mistake that, I've tried to teach meditation.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. That's the whole problem with our goal-orientedness.
Yeah.
There's only one thing to work with, and it is the present. And I like, for that reason, I like that expression by Dogen. I paraphrase it. It's not exactly what he says, but that's the way now you can say Gendun says that. I think we should think about Buddhahood in terms of a verb. So to do Buddha rather than pursuing it, because it allows us to sort to use these stories as a way of perception of what is Buddhahood. And it's a complex phenomenon, or actually very simple, but not from our perspective. And then to, once you have that sense, and to sit down and then to do that. Like whatever you imagine the Buddha to be at that moment, then to sit down and then to do that. Because the Buddha is also you. You will one day become Buddha, and then you're like all other Buddhas. Yeah. And indeed, that's the way I meditate myself. Like the first thing that I do before meditation is always clean out my room. So I clean my room. I put everything has its place. So I'm very organized. And that's the same thing is true for my laptop and for my iPad, everything. Because that organizing, it creates like a mindful environment. And by the way, also an aesthetically pleasing environment. So I'm not just cleaning per se. I make my environment always look very pleasing. There's a great importance to that. Because also meditation, like all good things, good meditation is very aesthetical. Now, when your mind is really doing it, it is beautiful it's very elegant in its movements. Yeah. And yeah, I read these stories. I read all the time in between. If I don't have anything else to do, then I like these stories a lot. And then, of course, I do extensive prayers because these prayers are worthwhile. But I also keep these prayers just switching around. At the moment, I'm back into Nagarjuna. I wrote a beautiful text on bodhicitta. So that's one of my current favorites. And so I keep these things constantly alive. But indeed, I do quite a bit of prayer before, and that really creates like the right environment. And only then the rest happens. Yeah. So, yeah. The microphone is coming back.
The secularness of meditation without the sacred around it. I mean, that's what we're teaching mindfulness as, you know.
Yes.
It's
Yeah. That's a Western neurosis.
Yeah.
And that's a shame. And we believe that, yeah, there's little we can do about it. It's strangely enough, it is a neurosis and it makes us feel superior on top of that. That's why we have such great difficulty getting out. Yeah, and it's not true. Yeah. This allows us to see how magical the world is. But I must say, and that is, yeah, then we go a little bit of on a tangent, but one thing that I always appreciated a lot about Tsongkhapa's perception and enlightenment is that we have an inclination to live sort of like we make this so tasteless that we desire a fantasy world, some heaven or something. This morning, like, I will not name any names, but that there's aliens are demons, like no one has ever seen aliens, let alone demons, whatever. We're always looking for something out there that one day we will discover, or that, that gnomes are actually doing your garden at night when you sleep, blah, 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 blah. And what Tsongkhapa does is he shows the imminence of enlightenment. The magic is here, not out there. It's not afterwards when we die. It's not upstairs hanging above the clouds. The great magic is here. Here is where Buddhahood is happening. Here, when you really see what this is magic. But we make it tasteless. Yeah. And then we long for something else. That's called escapism.
or a comet.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, so far so good. So now you have some extra ideas that I would like to send you home with that are very good to develop. Yeah. So I need to give you one thing more. Let me see, how am I doing in time? It's okay-ish. And so now you have these awakening factors, and you have the recordings, and later on, as you can imagine, there's infinitely more to say about them than when I just did. But otherwise, it becomes a very scholastic weekend. This is enough for you to navigate, and the rest are details. Yeah. If you ever forget to do the details, then ask me, and we'll tell you the details as well. But it's not for today. By the way, we do that in the in-depth meditation training. Then we go into great detail. But about that later. Now, how to say this? How to best no, of course, our basic problem lies in our concepts, and there will come one day that we don't need them anymore. But Tsongkhapa argues something of interest. He says, our concepts are like a witness that sometimes tells lies. So it doesn't mean that we abandon them altogether. Sometimes he does tell the truth. So we need the witness for a moment. What is our business is to figure out when and about what the witness lies and when the witness is telling the truth. Yeah. And again, that is where thinking for us will play a lot of, for a long time to come, a major role in meditation. We hold something with mindfulness so that we can use thinking to investigate it. As we've seen, thinking does not always need to be verbal, but is an active way of looking at things. Yeah. Why do I say that? Because our thinking allows us, as both its advantage and its disadvantage, it allows us to think about things separately from one another that are nevertheless connected. Yeah. So I can think about the chair, and I can think about the legs of the chair separately from one another, while in reality they can't exist without each other. The chair only exists independent on the legs in this case. Yeah. So my concepts allow me to separate these things out, to generalize, but in reality they are inseparable. Yeah. So there's something of interest about your perceptions. So what is here is a perception. Yeah. That's what you're looking at. There is two sides to the coin, and one side to that coin we almost never really look at. That is what meditation is all about. And that is the subjective aspect, the awareness. Very important, therefore, to understand is that there's knower and known, as the scholastic texts describe it. But knower and known make no sense apart from each other. Yeah, we can separate them conceptually, but no one has ever seen one apart from the other. Yeah, that is one of the forms of ignorance that we struggle with, object-subject duality. The two exist by grace of the other. Knower makes only sense in relationship to something known. But it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And so when we follow our breath, we observe that we observe an always changing phenomenon. The deeper you look, the more change you will see. Every moment is new. And so one moment produces another moment, and so forth. And that is now even what quantum physics caught up with. Particles change from moment to moment. In fact, they can change identity altogether and become back what they were in the first place. And so in a way, there's nothing going from moment to moment. Every moment produces the next moment. That is what you really see. Why do I say that the awareness is related to the known? Because for you to know that, your mind does the same thing. And we have the sense that our awareness is pre-existing the observed and that it stays the same. And that does not make any sense. And so the breath and the awareness of the breath, these are two sides of an experience. If one side is different, then the other side is definitely also different. Does that make sense? A bit? Yeah. And so what is here is a perception, an experience. And this experience, and I'm being quite deliberate with my words, contains two sides, like two sides of the same coin. So there is, I'm aware of Jeff, who's going to sit soon on our altar with a sword. And so in this case, there is Jeff as an awareness, of my object of awareness, and this awareness of Jeff. And these two sides, although we can conceptually separate them, are never seen apart from each other. You never see awareness without an object of awareness. Awareness means to be aware of something. It is a relational phenomenon. Yeah, a lot to be explored there, but let's keep it simple. We've been looking at the breath so far. And so what you are having in this experience, the awareness of that experience and what you are experiencing belong together. They are two sides of the same coin, but you can, which means that as the breath is changing from moment to moment, you know by that very fact that your awareness is also changing from moment to moment. Yeah? Third time? Okay, good. Yeah. And I will show you, I will point something out to you that is really pleasant in this. Yeah. Because for one thing, that sort of that sense of permanence of both the mind and ourselves is what is the basis for all our neurosis. And that is why we drag things from the past with us. And that something happened in the past and we can't walk away from it. But that is, we do that. It's our ignorance that does that. Yeah. Guilt is not necessary. It's completely superfluous. You're not the same thing anymore. It's not possible. And so what we're going to try is to start with the breath and then sort of look to the side to switch from our habitual object obsessiveness to the subject side of that same experience. You will find that in your daily life, it's most pleasant. Yeah. Now, the mind in Buddhism is defined, and don't try to, if it is new to you, don't worry about it. I will point it out to you in your meditation. So the other side is defined as clear and knowing. Now, the knowing is pretty straightforward. I know Jeff. Very interesting, by the way, it is an infinite amount of things to explore here. Because you only, for one thing, see things that you know. And to rattle your cage a bit. That's like, how on earth does that happen? Yeah. That's not for this weekend, though. Maybe for next year we can do that. We can do some Buddhist epistemology. Yeah. But not today. That would be way out of this complex. But so that knowing is pretty straightforward, but the clear, what is that clear? Well, the clear means that what I'm seeing is in the nature of my mind. But if my mind would have form or color or taste or smell or texture, it could not represent everything to me. In fact, it is absent. It is an absence of all these characteristics. That's what clarity means. And because it lacks manifest characteristics, it allows me to see this with all the clarity that it does. Yeah. That makes a bit of sense? Yeah. One good way that I found of thinking about this, and I will play that out a lot, because then this will be the object for the rest of our day, and you will find it very worthwhile in your daily life. A very good way to think about this is that I traveled a lot back and forth between my monastery in southern France and Holland, and halfway near Paris is my favorite cathedral, and that's the Cathedral of Chartres. And I remember going there for the first time, I guess, yeah, good 20 years ago, before my ordination. And I walked inside, and this is a massive medieval church, completely ridiculous. By the way, it's been built in a village. So you have this tiny village, and then like a cathedral somehow in the middle. It sticks out like, yeah. But you walk in, and it's a beautiful place. And all of a sudden, someone makes a sound. And by way of the sound, you become all of a sudden aware of how silent the church is. And that you hear that sound, when someone even drops like a needle, you would hear it with immense clarity exactly because of the silence of the cathedral. So the sound makes the silence of the cathedral audible to you. Otherwise, I walked in, I had just not noticed that it was silent until someone made a noise. And the The clarity, the impressiveness of that noise made visible how silent the church is. And that is a very good way to think about the clarity of the mind. How your mind can show you both silence and sound. It's more silent than silence itself. Your mind can show you both form and space. It is more spacious than both. It is therefore space-like. It is stillness. That is its nature. Because of that, it can show you all things. And that is where a famous expression from both the great Yogi Maitripa comes from and the great Ajahn Chah, stillness flowing. It's a stillness that flows in time. And that stillness flowing is always here. We are sitting here, and in the middle of this, what holds this is stillness flowing itself. But we are so object-oriented that we never notice. But in the present, you can always switch. They belong together. They cannot be found separate from each other. But I'm free to pay attention in this perception to what I want. Or I can at least learn to do that. So I can focus on my paper box, or I can focus on the stillness flowing that is holding the paper box to me. Now you can imagine when you have a situation of conflict, this is extremely helpful. Because you can focus on that aggressive sound in front of you, but you can switch to the stillness flowing in which that sound is happening. And when you do that, you are safe from your reactive emotions, because that stillness flowing is peace. So it is important to find it in meditation, because when you found it, you know that you have tasted it, but then you can refine it in every moment of your life. You can have always access to it. And you don't, and that is the main aspect in my meditative life in between my sessions that I always maintain. I listen as much to the sound as to the stillness that is holding the sound, because it provides me with balance and calm in no matter what turbulence happens. Because no matter how chaotic there will be, no matter how disturbed this is, something in here is always peaceful. And I can always see it. It just takes time to notice it. Does that make a bit of sense? It takes time. It's pretty straightforward once you found it, but yeah, not almost immediately. But again, the problem is here that language goes haywire. It doesn't go that far. So we must use non-meditative language to point something out that is meditative. But another good example that you could use is that you could go to a museum, look at the painting. But you can look at the image of the painting, but you can also look at the paint and the canvas. You can switch back and forth. So when you look at the canvas and the paint, you don't see the painting. They are necessarily part of the same coin, because without canvas and paint, there's no painting. But you can look at the paint, and then you're not seeing the image that is formed by that paint. Does it make better sense? Yeah. It's a matter of playing. And so these are all analogies. And so the mind is a still spaciousness that knows what it shows. And so you can focus from what it shows, from what it knows, to that stillness knowing, a still spacious knowing itself. Shall we try that? Yeah. And so it is helpful to remind us of the Chinese nuns of yesterday, and Angulimala. His Holiness, Amazon Rinpoche, said by their presence we look differently at ourselves. To look at ourselves as bodhisattvas. A community, at least here for the moment, being together, as Anuruddha says, like milk in water. With mutual kindness to pursue freedom for the welfare of all living beings. Who have gifted us this moment together. So that we can sit in a non-egocentric way, but rather filled with kindness, care, and equanimity. And to taste for ourselves the freedom that it is immediately endows us with. And for a moment, simply to cultivate this open awareness, this equanimous awareness. Observing without judgment, without hindrance, without holding on. Anything that comes and that goes. Our mind might want to jump to the future or to the past. But then we can indicate to the mind that this is mere make-believe. Neither future nor past exists. The past has ceased to exist. The future does not exist yet. So we may look deeply at the present, making the mind more and more still, calming our commenting, judging mind. Leaving sound simply as sound, images simply as images, and so on. Without adding our habitual stories. Until we become aware that all that we see is change. Like a flowing experience. Like a river with changing water and changing banks. When we are aware of this flowing aspect, you might try taking the second step, noticing the nature of the mind. And stillness is one of the easy access points. To notice that there is sound, that the fact that we can hear the sound implies the immense silence of the mind itself. It's not necessary this is immediately obvious. That's where our curiosity and our sense of wonder come in. For seemingly great masters like Ajahn Chah and Maitripa enjoyed abiding in this. So we might want to check out for ourselves. Observing the changelessness of sound, and trying to hear, as it were, the stillness behind it. To gently try, when you find it, to hold on to it for a moment. And when you lose it, to use sound, to once again, try to go back there. Okay, thank you. That's easy, no? No? Mhm.
I have a question about the physiology of the brain as we meditate and the purpose of like the pineal gland, the pituitary gland, and Brahman's cave. Is that a particular trinity that allows us to go to a more meditative state? Or am I just making this all up because of science?
The physiology, that aspect of physiology plays in Buddhism almost no role. This is because these are representations of the mind. That's the problem that we have. Is for us, from our cultural perspective, it's very difficult to get rid of reductionism. And the form aspect, apart from Tantra, and Tantra plays a major role in terms of channels and chakras. And that is a useful physiological model, because you can, what you do with it matters. For example, the moving around, the attention towards different chakras produces very distinct effects, and you can do quite interesting things with it. So that as an object of mind, these matter. But the brain and the glands and so on in Buddhism plays no role at all. This is a way that we represent these things. But then we come to believe that they pre-exist the mind. And I can guarantee you ultimately that that makes no sense at all. That's what the brain is. And that is actually what that American cognitive scientist says as well. He uses as an analogy your computer screen. And so there is like a bin in your corner. Yeah. And that bin is informative. Right? When you drag something in, you know what is happening. So if you want to check if that document is important to you, and that's why you get a warning, do you really want to throw it away? And if you say yes, then gone. Yeah. But we would not have the illusion that this is really what happens underneath. It's not a description at all of what happens underneath. Because what happens underneath is that now in the address system of the hard drive, that reference is removed. That is really what's happening. So that is a representation that is informative to some extent. No, it warns us what to do. Like you don't want to drag your important document that you've been working on, or that expensive scan of your painting by accident in that bin. But it's not what happens underneath. It's not a description of reality. It's a depiction of reality. An informative one, but it's no one-on-one description of what is really happening. And so from a Buddhist perspective, the whole idea of the brain and so on and so forth are descriptions. But they are as limiting as they are informative. So to some extent they can be helpful, but ultimately they don't matter. For one thing, there is, and this is where this heads a little bit to, there is concentrations in which no form appears. And if you pass away, having that sort of concentration, you would be reborn in a place where there is no form at all. That is, we use them, meditators often use these, Buddhist meditators use these concentrations to rest in. They are extremely restful. We don't cultivate them because they are risky for exactly the reason that you shuddered for. And when the Buddha becomes enlightened, he experiences enormous gratitude to his two former teachers. And he is inclined first to teach them, but then realizes that they have achieved indeed these concentrations. And in these, that is where they're reborn in what they call the formless realm. There's no form there. But that is almost a sort of an innate state of mind. So to his great sadness, he realizes that he can't reach them. There's no sound there, there's no form, there's an extremely silent abiding, but nothing of much interest. Yeah. But it shows that there are places where there is still awareness, but awareness that is disconnected from form at all. So where brain and glance and so on don't matter anymore. Yeah. So the mind is interwoven with the world, but the world is more complicated than form alone. This is by far the most coarse realm. Yeah. And so there's a realm above this that is what is called the realm of fine form. And when the mind goes there, that what you see is quite exquisite, very different, very subtle, very fine. And then there's something beyond where all apprehension of form disappears. So again, it's important to keep in mind that we, especially as Westerners, that makes it hard to overcome. Indian traditions already played with different perceptions of the world. And so they have a much more flexible and mentally navigating different perceptions of what the universe might be. And we are stuck in a narrative of materialism. And that creates, again, a duality, and dualities are dangerous. All dualities where when we say something is more fundamental than something else, invites unethical behavior. And as you see, for example, in the 20th century, this whole materialism and reductionism caused both communism and capitalism, in which human beings became production factors rather than living beings. In fact, we live in a culture where we don't really believe anymore that we are really living beings. Now, even with AI, in the early Enlightenment period, we were compared to clocks. And then they invented hydraulic systems, and then now we were compared to hydraulic systems, and we have an endless belief that that is a real description of who we are, but not very fortunate. Yeah. One thing to consider is that, for example, there's no scientific explanation for this, but and then you see where things go wrong. There's been done some research on meditators. Qualified meditators, 10,000, 30,000 hours and more of concentration. And according to physiological theories, how do you call them? Our reflex centers in the body are independent. Yeah. And so even if your brain doesn't work, when you hit the knee, the leg still moves. Yeah. And so that creates that sense of we live up here and there's something happening down there as well. What they found to their surprise is that someone goes really in deep concentration, the effect of the reflex sensors also diminishes. So the mind is not a product of up there. The mind interacts, and not as two separate things. They are object. They are known, knower and known. In our life, they depend on each other, but they are mutually dependent. There is no body apart from the mind. And in our case, in our specific awareness, there's also no awareness apart from the body. But after we die, that can change. Yeah. So we don't manipulate the brain in that sense. Yeah. Even Buddhism, one could say, is a practice of epistemology of perception. So what we do is to work with perception. And we try to figure out, on the one hand, what seems to be there, what we can verify is not there at all. One could call deconstructive meditation. And on the other hand, what we call the constructive meditation. So to learn to see the world in an actively different way. For example, compassion is a constructive meditation. I try to see you as part of me, as interconnected with me. And so that is an active, constructive aspect. I know that is true, but I also need to learn to see it that way. I need to learn to feel it. So I cultivate that way of looking at you, for example. But I also cultivate that you seem to exist outside of me. And that is not true in that way. That's not even possible. And so I take something away and on that basis, try to inform it in novel and more informative ways. Yeah. So that is what this practice is all about. Yeah. Make sense?
So amazingly, this kind of follows on that, but my question is about the role of words that, and I'll just speak for myself, that there are times when, like when I hear, like even the last couple of days, as you lead us into a meditative experience, when you use words like compassion, kindness, words like that, and the words themselves are with me. And they sometimes carry like an emotion with them, but then I feel the emotion. And I've kind of trained myself to say, yes, that's a good sign. And yet the word is a form. So when I'm meditating and I focus on the form, or sometimes I think I have a choice to focus on a person, a specific person, which is then an experience. And then that will lead to the emotion. And I'll go, oh, now I'm there.
Yeah.
But I guess I'm asking for guidance there.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so much there. You might have noticed that I emphasize anyway the felt sense rather than what is seen. In terms of how our perception works, the foundational aspect, but then again, we have a great cultural limitation that I'm always careful with it. Ever since the Enlightenment period, some men came up with a great idea that feelings are not only unreliable, they are feminine as well. Yeah. Yeah, that, yeah, as we say, to catch two birds with the same stone. But that makes, I've run a yogi boot camp, an individual training for 5 years. And one of the things that I very quickly realized, for one thing, I never noticed myself because I was brought up by a woman. So I have a good complex sense of emotions. But I realized very quickly that many of the meditators that I train, women including, have a very poor sense of feeling, which makes very difficult to guide someone in meditation because you feel your way around more than you think your way around. This tradition sometimes helps that as well, I have to be honest. And this is not the way you do that actually. So the felt sense matters a lot. And someone highlighted that I use my words in a very specific way, and that is deliberate is the wrong way to say it. I'm not manipulating you, but I'm very aware of how we arise in dependence on each other. And I allow my words to happen in a specific way that matters for this space that we participate in, so that they elicit feeling. Because I want to feed you, I want to make you feel something, not make you to understand something. Because, you know, look at we talked earlier about our January 1st resolutions. These are usually logical conclusions, and they last about 2 hours. If you're lucky. Yeah. And so an intellectual understanding is not transformative in that sense. But when you feel it, it's transformative. That's the same thing with these stories. It's not the content that matters. It's what they make you feel like that matters a lot. That matters everything. And so in meditation, when you work with these prayers or with the different narratives or the Jataka stories or whatever, it's not like you keep actively that story in mind during your meditation. What it does is creates a felt sense in the background, which holds your intent. So everything feels like it is part of that, even when you don't think of that anymore. It's like, and that plays in, for those that have studied a bit, that plays an immense role in the final transformative moment of our path. It's called something called the path of seeing. And there's always an argument why, hey, we have different end goals. You can find your individual enlightenment, but you can also find an enlightenment that seeks Buddhahood, enlightenment for everyone. Both practitioners have a path of what they call a path of seeing, a moment where they see emptiness. They realize directly all things are absent, all things are empty of inherent or essential existence. The question is always, why is that so much more powerful for the bodhisattva? Because both only see directly one single thing, and that's emptiness. The difference is the felt sense in the background. Even when it is not directly visible, the felt sense of the bodhisattva is holding all living beings, is an immeasurable compassion. And even when you don't see it directly, it holds the mind, and so powerful. That is what this realization of emptiness does, is so much more penetrative. And that is the way, for me at the beginning when I studied, this was the eye-opener. We over-focus on the emptiness. I learned to focus on what holds my wisdom realizing emptiness. And that is where my power comes from. It's my felt sense of the world. And so that's why I emphasize this. As a meditator, I'm especially a cultivator of my felt sense of the world. And the rest happens within that felt sense. That's why I can relax. That's why I'm happily chatting away to you without bothering. No, I don't have to worry, for example, about saying the wrong thing, because my felt sense protects my speech. So don't have to worry about that the wrong thing might come out of my mouth, that I might say something insulting to you or denigrating or whatever you have, because my felt sense of the world does not make that possible at the moment. Yeah, yes. So felt sense matters everything, yeah. And words, the purpose of words is to do that. And in terms of Buddhist psychology, it is again, that is one, I would emphasize everyone to study that. It's my favorite topic to teach as well, mind and mental factors. The definition of feeling, it is in the nature of experience. Our experience is, first of all, a felt experience, and only secondarily a known experience. No, I always joke when you walk in the savannah and a lion is coming your way, hey, you don't want to take your encyclopedia to figure out what he is eating. And when you're on the savannah and a lion comes your way, that feels bad. You run, which is stupid, by the way. Yeah. Lions run faster than you do, so the lion will happily sort of calmly walk after, like, I don't need to hurry. These humans, they tire very quickly, so let's just, oh, my hamburger is, yeah. And that is where mindfulness again comes in. And so for us, the feeling matters, but not in an unquestioned way. The untrained mind believes that the unpleasantness is in the tiger or the lion, and that's why we run. We overcome by our experience. A meditator knows that the unpleasant feeling is the mind trying to say something about the lion. And then I can think, like, I don't want to run because then I don't have a reactive response to it. And I have the space to think, like, there's a lion, I might want to stand my ground, because that is what lions don't expect. And so if you stand your ground, the chances are that he attacks you are negligible. Yeah. Does it make sense? Yeah. Oh, I can answer that. That is, as I told you already earlier. My sadness is that there's so much misery coming from such a minor mistake. It is so extraordinarily unnecessary. And yet here we are. Here we are. That's what I read in the morning newspaper. It's not necessary. We can't help ourselves. Of course, that's why I still read the newspaper. There's a common Tibetan joke that, you know, And that that's a trap that we often fall into. That we meditate on compassion for all living beings, but somehow that category, all living beings, doesn't include any living being. The all living beings only make sense when you have cultivated it towards a whole lot of individual living beings. One of the things that I do is I read a newspaper in the morning, not for the news. That someone's been throwing bombs at someone else again is not news. That's what history looks like. That's what makes history boring. Person A kills person B. I mean, read the Bible. It's where it starts. Yeah. And so we're not doing much better ever since. I read the newspaper always to meet someone. I read a number of specific sources for the capacity to tell stories about exquisite people that are trying to make a difference out there. I'm always trying to meet someone. And so that person, I start to relate from that person outwards, because that person tells me something about everyone else. So that all living beings feels personal to me. Yeah, hope that makes sense. Yeah. Microphone to the lady up front.
So I had a question about this, observing the silence flowing. If
Thank you
that-
for bringing it back there.
Um, I'm wondering if that's more observing it in our mind, like in the subjective awareness.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because like when you talk about the silence flowing like around the box or
No.
in the church, at first gives the sense that it's something external, but it's more like meditating. We're really observing something that's
Yes.
in our mind and the subjective awareness.
Exactly.
Correct?
Yeah. It's a silence so deep that it allows you to, it is capable of showing you silence itself. And so when I'm in the church, there is a silence of the church, and there's a silence of my mind holding the silence of the church. The silence of my mind is more silent than the silence of the church. It's exactly that subjective aspect. And so it is like silence. It's described as an absence. There's an absolute absence both of silence and sound. Oh, yeah. She wants the microphone back. Mine.
Um, so is there any, like when the mind is sleepy, the mind is sleepy and I notice it's sleepy. Is there any like advantage to, instead of like fighting the sleepiness, which I find that doesn't really help, but I just started this last session of just almost observing the dullness.
Yes, it's just
And then it's almost like observing the dullness. I came to the idea of like observing the flowing silence. I thought, well, maybe there's alertness underneath the dullness or around the
exactly.
dullness. So like I thought, well, maybe instead of fighting, which in the past doesn't work to fight it, it just,
Yes.
so then I just thought, well, I'll just observe, become curious about this dullness and just observe it. And it feels like the mind becomes more alert.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Hey, your dullness is simply an appearance to mind, because that aspect, although the mind changes from moment to moment, it must do that. Every moment of it is always, that aspect remains the same. It's clear and knowing. Even in your deepest sleep, your mind just shows deep sleep. That's the paradox. And you can find it. The problem is, in our case, is that, and that's quite interesting actually in long meditative retreats where you focus on samadhi, is that when we fall asleep, our mindfulness drops off. And so we don't remember whole chunks of sleep because we don't remember much of our day anyway. We have what they call inattentive awareness, where the mind is so unattentive that we don't create memories. That is exactly why time seems to speed up when we become older. The older we become, the more inattentive we become. But if you do intense samadhi retreats, then your mindfulness becomes quite something else. And it can become at one point so powerful that it stays on all night long. So even when you sleep, mindfulness is still present. And that's something else. So then you have, strangely enough, a memory of having slept for 4 hours. And when you wake up, that's extremely restorative. Yeah. Yeah. And so the mind always mirrors everything, but normally we lose whole chunks because then the mind doesn't really pay attention. In the Abhidharma, there's a description of different moments of mind actually perform different functions. And so to have a cognition actually is quite the mind is very active in constructing the world. Maybe there's something that I want to say now about that as well before we take a little break and try it again. One way of looking at things is that when we talk about samadhi, our mind makes the world. Yeah. And not individually, by the way, it's communal. I use common concepts to make the world. Yeah. Different creatures for that reason see different worlds. And they're partially interconnected and partially separated. The dog sees some things in common with us and some things it doesn't seem in common with us. Yeah. And like seeing another dog, and then Micro Puppy is very enlightened about it. One very interesting way. So when you talk about this meditation, there's two ways of looking at it. And they say almost the same thing. So on the one hand, you could say that our mind, our attention is normally completely imprisoned by our perceptions. So some things appear attractive, and I have the sense that I want to look at it, but in fact, I have no choice. That's you see with your distractions, for example. Try not to pay attention to them. That makes the things only worse. Yeah. So that's where equanimity plays a major role in. Equanimity. And so you at different levels, you can take some of their aspects away. What we focused on is that they seem advantageous. They seem something you want, that somehow they're going to contribute to you. And when you take that delusion away, they become much less attractive. You can also see them, which is very important, as non-self. You don't think them at all. They just happen. And also that takes their power away. That is, the power that they have is simply completely illusory. So when you, to the extent that you see them as what they are, for what they are, extremely transient, not helpful, not self, then their attractiveness is gone. So their attractiveness comes from their appearance. They seem to be permanent, self, and useful, and they're not. And so once you see them for what they are, you become free to withdraw your attention. And that is one way of looking at what we just did. And so when we start with that equanimity, you can all of a sudden move your attention around within that perception. And you become free, like, okay, now all of a sudden, rather than being attracted to, well, I really like his beard. It's always one of my sadnesses of Buddhist monastic ordination, I can't have a beard. I can place my attention wherever I want and I can let it be there because nothing is pulling at it, because all things are seen to me as equal in one way or another. Yeah, that's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is when you calm the mind, you calm your conceptual making, you condense time, as it were. We have the sense that our present is sort of this big, even bigger maybe. And what you get is that it becomes narrower, 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 until it has no thickness at all anymore. It's only flowing. And within that flowing, there's actually not even enough information around to make things. Now, when there's a sound, when you might say this is an A note. But if I narrow the time down, and I'll give you 1/1,000,000th of a second of that note, you will not be able to tell which note it is, because an A note is a wave. And so for me to know that is an A, I need to know its tops and its downs. So music only makes sense through memory. And it's one of the fascinating things, you can't hear music. You construct music. There's no way to hear it. You need memory in order to make out what tone you are hearing. Fascinating. And so at one point, your concentration is so profound, so acute, the present that you're observing is so narrow that nothing is being constructed anymore. And that is why there is no appearance, there's no sensory appearance, because you make it. Nothing is being made. There's no things there. There's a point of observation that becomes ever more, quite spectacular, by the way, but quite fine. And everything else drops away because in order to pay attention to it, the mind must construct it. That's where it comes from, that what we see, we know. It has made it first. There's a knowing, I perceive a chair. I don't need to figure out that it is a chair. My perception already contains that information. It's pre-processed. It has already done tons of things before it becomes to my clear awareness. But when you engage in deep samadhi, that constructing activity calms down. So at one point, it calms down so deeply that it doesn't construct your world anymore. You can't be distracted because there's nothing there to distract you, because the distraction was always made by you in the first place. And then the funny thing is, or the interesting thing is, when you then come out of concentration, you use something what they call access concentration in the Theravada tradition, calm abiding in the Tibetan tradition, where your mind gradually starts to come out. And when you look really deeply, we use it actually deeply to investigate, you can see that the mind constructs your world back up. You have no idea how much information this entails. Tons. This is a complete story. And so when you come out of calm, you see the mind rebuilding your world. It starts to tell your story, like, who is this again? Because in that state, there's no way of knowing. There's not even a separatedness between observer and observed anymore. There's something else happening. But then you come out, and then that separation starts to happen again. But you see the mind trying to figure out, like, who is the seer again? Oh yeah, his name is Gendun. Where am I in this space again? And so you see this gradually building that story out until you have a coherent world again. But deep calm works because there's an absence of that world. The mind becomes extremely simple, one could say. Yeah. Make sense? Yeah. Well, to the extent, yeah. Yeah. Let's maybe leave it there for the moment. I think to fight the stillness is more useful. I suggest that we take a 10-minute break until 35, and you can do all the things that you need to do and other things that I don't want to know about. And then we have a final session.
So about this object meditation, like you said, it's like space-like. So it's kind of hard for me to find it since it has no form S. But it seems like if I have like an appearance of an object, it kind of informs the space, just like, okay, so is that easy? Is that the way to access the space, or just go to the voidness?
No. You can only, in a way, you can only find it indirectly. That's why exactly I use the example of the cathedral in Chartres. So it's by way of the sound that you notice the silence. Although it goes deeper than that, it's an analogy. Just a way to find something. Before I say something more about that, I would like to highlight two things now that I think of it. And in my mind it goes again. I see lists coming by. There's a famous Buddhist joke by now that Christians love God and Buddhists love lists. So I cannot help myself. Yeah. So first of all, your remark was good. It's heavy. And the answer is it's not. And that's something, it's not a judgment. It's something that is worthwhile to investigate. Thank you. Hadi, it is quite liberating to discover that we make our own lives challenging. That's not a judgment. We don't know that we do that. And so when we do that, it's important to use it as a gateway to undo that. It's not necessary. And that's exactly why I gave you the story yesterday about Losang monastery. You remember that? Where I was struggling with His Holiness saying way too many things about something that I realized in the second sentence. I did not understand the first sentence, that thing. Yeah. And so, and it's also a very cultural characteristic, and I wanted to compare it because I did exactly the same thing. What did I hear? I felt being made inferior by the Dalai Lama. That's what I really heard. What I really heard is that he should have toned down for me. And when you think of it, that's a bit of a stretch. But yet that is what we hear. And that's the consequence of our sense of self. And our Western sense of self is complicated, especially because of our individualism. Yeah. I spent some time, for example, in the Middle East, and that was one of the first times I really ran into this. I had a friend who had a boat running back and forth across the Nile, and I spent quite a bit of time with his family on the opposite side. I had myself smuggled into that area because the tourists are not allowed to go there by the military. So I had myself packed in the back of a taxi and brought to some Egyptian village in the middle of nowhere. And I would see him on a regular basis, and I had sort of tried to get some Arabic vocabulary going. And I figured out that in Arabic, there's wonderful ways to say, how are you? In fact, the longer you can say that, the better it is. And so you can stack all kinds of qualifiers. You can make that into like a long poetic thing that just means, how are you? And so I felt pretty good about myself. So I constructed, every time I saw him, I made my sentence longer. I found new ways to add to my first sentence. At one point, he looked at me and he says, please stop asking me how I am. If you want to know how I am, ask me about my family. If you know how my family is, you know how I am. And that was such a confrontation because my sense of self is dependent on my actions alone. His sense of self was dependent on the relationships with his family. That means that his sense of self was much less fragile than mine because my predicament is impossible. I can never live up to the thing that I'm supposed to be. It's not possible. And that makes us, when we sit in front of His Holiness and His Holiness goes wild on Madhyamika and Tantra, we think like, thou shalt not talk like this. Yeah. And that was why this was confrontational, that the Geshe next to me that had already finished his studies said, I don't understand it either, but it's beautiful because it's poetic. And I thought that for me, that was really an eye-opener. That was really a relief of my own mind. I don't need to understand everything. What I would like to do is to enjoy the poetry of it. Yeah. And some of the things go from one ear to another ear, but at least I try to remember the poetry of the whole story. And I will figure out later, because that is what they do. For them, it's like, wow, I did not understand that. Let's run back home, let's find that commentary, and let's start to figure out what on earth he was talking about. It's like an invitation. It creates enthusiasm and joy and all these things, and we feel deflated. And that's a very cultural phenomenon. So again, it's not a judgment, but it's something that we really have to work with. Otherwise, specifically in this tradition, it becomes overwhelming. Yeah. And so it's really important to learn just to enjoy the poetry, even if you don't get all the aspects. The poetry is sometimes simply enough. Like, okay, that sounds pretty cool. And the fact that he can explain everything, even if I didn't understand, it gives me confidence that it can be explained. I thought I was always, from the beginning, when I first met the Dharma, that was the one thing that gave me trust in the Dharma. The Buddha had an explanation for everything. It was not just like, well, this is outside of your purview of awareness, but you have to believe in it. And as 16-year-old, I thought, yeah. I don't think so. Yeah. And then I met the Buddha, and the Buddha just explains. And there were many things at the beginning that I did not understand either. But I felt that the fact that the Buddha could explain everything to be extremely empowering. Like, I don't understand it today, but I will wrap my head around it. Yeah. And then, funny enough, I went to, some of you know this book, so that makes for a funny story. I went to the monastery and then I tried again. And there was a book in the monastery's library by Jeffrey Hopkins, Meditation on Emptiness. And everyone asked, that's a book about 1,000 pages on the Gelug view on emptiness. Yeah. And every new monk will try to get that book and read it. To discover after 2 pages that it doesn't make any sense at all. And then you get quite, let's be honest, pissed off, and then you put it back in the library. Like, rather than reading it, as I say, it's a magnificent piece of work. It's exquisite. And to think like, I will come to the point that I know exactly what that book says. And then, after 10 years of study or whatever, then to read through the book and to think to yourself, now I finally know what Hopkins was talking about. Is rewarding. So to have a sort of piece of beauty with you, even if you don't understand it, and then to get at a point. There's another good example of this. I ran into this myself. For those, has any one of you read Gödel Escher Bach? Gödel Escher Bach by Douglas Hofstadter said that this is the most unread coffee table book ever. Yeah, anyone that wants to look, Gödel, from the German Austrian philosopher, Gödel Escher Bach by Douglas Hofstadter, American philosopher. Yeah, and so everyone that wants to look intelligent buys it, but then doesn't read it beyond the first 20 pages or so, because it tells the whole story of logic and whatever you had. But at one point I was 18 years old and I had a girlfriend, and my girlfriend had a sister, and she had another boyfriend, and he was studying mathematics, and he was doing like looking superior and stuff. And me as an 18-year-old, I was not into him looking superior to me. And at one point he told that they were studying that book for its description of basic logic. And I thought I can do that as well. Yeah, I read my way entirely through that book. I actually learned programming on the way just to make sense of it, only to find out that he had never read it. It was with, but there was in this case, a wrong desire to read it, but nevertheless, I started to get into it, and it explains exactly what is called the theorem of Gödel. Gödel says something foundational about the world, but it's difficult to wrap your head around. And so, I'd seen it because in what page it is. It's about on page 400. And the first time you look at that, this is on 2 pages. And the first time you look at it, you think like, what? It's 2 pages of complete gibberish. Makes no sense whatsoever. And so I started from the basics, and that book was hard, but I worked my way through it bit by bit, every day, a little bit. And I became enthused by my growing understanding and appreciation of what was being said there. So bit by bit, I learned more logic and how these systems worked and so on. He tells beautiful stories in between as well about Achilles and the turtle. Delightful. And so after all this time, I had completely forgotten about page 400. And at one point in the argument, the tension, the crescendo builds, and I remember turning the page, and I cried. Because I turned the page and I saw in one image what was being said on that page. It was so simple, but so beautiful and elegant. It was so moving to see something so exquisite. And then it makes so much sense. I could have never understood that in the beginning. But then all of a sudden, it dawns to you. I did not really need to read the page. The moment I saw it, from what I had, all the work that I've done for the months before, I became prepared. And then I saw it, and there was, where I saw a bunch of gibberish before, I saw an astonishingly beautiful move, an exquisite piece of insight. Yeah, Gödel's incomplete theory, indeed. Yeah, so why any sufficiently complex theory is not either incomplete or incoherent. Yeah, but don't worry about it. Yeah. So how he proves that is exquisite. Yeah. And that is something to work with also in the Dharma. The argument, the Madhyamika argument is actually very simple. But it takes some working towards to, once you see it, it is the same thing. It is so beautiful, so elegant. And you wonder like, how did I ever believe that things were different than that? Yeah. But it will take some time. So relax, enjoy the poetry. And one day you will open Nagarjuna and you will think like, yeah, of course. Of course. Yeah. Even you will, I hope you enjoyed it the same thing as I did, that you open the Mula Madhyamika Karika, the verses to the middle way, and you read the verse first and you think, yeah, that's it. Now I know. Yeah. Yeah. So even if things are challenging, I want to give you both access, but also show you something about the larger picture. And that is inevitably, yeah, is challenging. But I hope that it gives you courage and that the Dharma works from the very fact that I can explain it. Yeah, it will come. And to rattle your cage, to make things a bit worse, now that that was my opening statement so that I can make things much worse. Yeah. So interestingly enough, the brain exists in dependence on parts, causes and conditions, and imputation. And still, it works. It is outside, but it is not inherently outside. Because outside only makes sense in relation to inside. But these things are dependently existing. Ultimately, there is no in or outside. So from our perspective, these things exist in that way, and the brain is outside, and so on and so forth. But ultimately, none of that is really true. That's why Tara says she knows she's not real, because the way she appears to us makes ultimately no sense at all. The world is much more beautiful and simple than that. But for the moment, we will have to navigate it, and then brains still perform functions. But it does not exist from its own side. When you would analyze and investigate the brain, you find nothing. And that's exactly why it works. That is a paradox. Yeah. Cheers. Yeah. Yeah. So now you know. I hope you became enlightened, and at least I can feel good about myself. My Buddha project started actually from a joke that, and in my Train Institute, that if simply explaining the Dharma would be sufficient, I would have started a Buddha factory. I would invite a bunch of people. I would explain the Four Noble Truths. They would become enlightened. I will send them out and take the next group, and I would become rich in the meanwhile. But so far, my students are failing me. And I'm pretty sure my teachers thought the same thing about me. So maybe, yeah. Yeah, it's a dance that we dance together. Yeah, that maybe I think is one of the most elegant analogies for Madhyamika. When you dance, there is no dancer. If one of the two starts to take initiative, you start to step on someone's toes. In a real dance, both dancers respond to each other, and they both have the feeling that they're just responding to the other. Yeah. And then you start to understand how the world works. Yeah. Yeah. But anyway, so before we go back for a moment to that stillness, I just wanted to show it to you. And this takes time to become habituated to. But I can guarantee you it is worth your while. You have the recordings. You can work with it. Yeah. And so it's important to understand that silence is an analogy for what is to be seen there. And so for the mind to be able to show you the manifest world, from form to color to emotions and thoughts and all the other things of the world, it needs to be devoid of these characteristics itself. If the mind were red, then we could only see one color and that would be red. And yet I can see all colors. I can even see transparency. So somehow my mind is more spacious than space itself in that sense, so that it can show me every color, every form, and so on and so forth. And so when we talk about the clarity of the mind, on the one hand, it is an absence of manifest characteristics, which you can find. It's findable in an interesting way. And because of that, we see a very clear world. Because if my mind would have aspects, my mind would be frosted, I would never see you clearly. And if my mind had a certain color, I could never see your color clearly. If my mind would have a certain form, your form would be disturbed by the form of my mind. Now, if my mind is like bend, then all of you would sort of appear really bended to me. Yeah. Which actually is the problem I had when I got new glasses recently, because it turned out that I have, how is it, a cylinder in my eye that my mind always corrected. Until, well, this became problematic and I got glasses with a cylinder inbuilt. And for months after that, I saw a world. I remember opening my iPad and my iPad looked really like this. Like I went back to the shop, like there's something wrong with my. But if my mind would have a form, then everything would have to abide by that form. And so the one aspect of the mind itself, as the other half of an experience, is that it is without these characteristics. And so you can look for that absence. And that is why I gave you that analogy of the church. So by way of the sound, you find something that sound is only clear to you because the church is actually silent. Otherwise, you could never hear that sound. Now, if there were a metal band playing in that church, then if you dropped the needle, you would not hear the needle falling. It would be impossible. And so the fact that we have such a clear perception shows something about the mind. And that you do exactly as you say, you do by way of almost looking behind it. And sound is a very easy access point. There's many more, but I don't want to confuse you by introducing another 25 methods. So this is one that's worth working with. Also because in daily life, it's relatively easy to do once you get the hang of it. And so it is and as I said, I was not the first one that found this. Evidently, Ajahn Chah and the great yogi Maitripa found the same thing, deep stillness. That the world is held by stillness itself. And that I can move my attention from manifest characteristics to the stillness holding these characteristics. Yeah. And that is what we are trying to do. That takes time. Yeah. One thing to add to that is find joy in trying it. There was those before you that managed. It's pretty obvious. It's just like all things, like riding a bicycle is obvious, but not for Superman. Yeah. As Superman will look at you like you're crazy. I mean, 3 wheels are a good basis, but 2 wheels are insane to want to work. Yeah? And at one point, you know what this is. And then you think like, okay, that's same here. Yeah. So in the beginning, this is awkward. At one point, you think like, oh, all of a sudden your mind can do that. It's worth your while to practice with. And as I said, it is very useful in your daily existence. So when your mind starts to elaborate slightly, unfortunately, about your reality, then you can always go there. So when the world becomes overwhelming to your mind, then you can always notice the silence in between. And that immediately stabilizes everything. The stillness is safe. So your refuge is already here. It's the other half of your experience. And that is wonderful to have, that stillness flowing. One thing to add to that, just to protect you in a way, is that for some, it can when you initially find it, it can sometimes create a sense of vertigo, as though all of a sudden you fall. Yeah. If that happens and that is uncomfortable, stop it for a moment. Follow the breath for a little while, try again. It will pass away. And we rely heavily, we are object obsessed. So we only ever notice one half of the experience. The other half we're completely oblivious to. And so we experience this construction as something to hold on to. And when you notice the silence really, that your mind lets go of the construction, and it can create a sense of falling. And that's okay. If it is uncomfortable, stop it for a moment. Refocus on the breath, and breathe for a while, and then try to refine it. Again, it's not necessary to make yourself really uncomfortable. When you do that a few times over and over, and you become habituated to it, you find there's actually even more stability in the stillness and in the manifest world. Yeah. Does that make a bit of sense? Yeah. And so always take care of your mind. The point is not to force ugly sentence, twice the same word on both sides of another word. That's very ugly. Yeah, but the point is not to force the point. The point is to find freedom. Yeah. And freedom is surprisingly accessible. And when you get this, then there is one more step beyond that, and that is called emptiness. Yeah. And so this is like a taster in a way. This stillness is an analogy, in the same way that silence is an analogy for the stillness of the mind. The stillness of the mind is analogous to the emptiness behind it. Yeah. But it gives you a taste of why it would be worth your while to realize that things do exist, but they're empty of existing independently. That all things are not in an endless web of connections. Yeah, that makes sense? Good? Yeah. So, yeah. So doing this meditation will help you greatly later on if we ever get into maybe next Tuesday meditating on Madhyamaka. Yeah, it gives you some sense how to work with absences. Yeah. Yeah. So. We can start with, again, taking a moment to become aware of us sitting here together in this room, like these great nuns of old. As a community of caretakers. As bodhisattvas to be. And to know that when we sit like this, we are resting on the shoulders of giants. Hundreds of generations of men and women having realized freedom. And to know the Buddha and lineage lamas among us. For looking into the world like this frees us from the oppression, aversion, desire, and indifference. And once tasted that release is more than happiness enough. Allowing our mind to become natural, spontaneous, and calmly abiding in the here and now. When we let go of stories of the past and the future, we free ourselves also of the shackles of identity. We become open-ended and flowing. We become without friction. And all things are free to come and go, to appear and disappear. Like birds fly through the sky without disturbing the sky. So we become simpler and simpler, more and more at ease. One could say that we then can move our attention from the birds to the sky, from the sound to the silence. That receptive stillness flowing through time. And to hold that space open with our awakening factors. Mindfulness, the three of curiosity, wonder, and wisdom. Energy, joy, tranquility, absorption, and equanimity. Then one night when it was evening, the Blessed One rose from meditation. He went to the park of the Kursinga Sala tree wood. The park keeper saw the Blessed One coming in the distance and told him, "Do not enter this park, recluse. There are 3 clansmen here seeking their own good. Do not disturb them." The Venerable Anuruddha heard the park keeper speaking to the Blessed One and told him, "Friend park keeper, do not keep the Blessed One out. It is our teacher, the Blessed One, who has come." Then the Venerable Anuruddha went to the Venerable Nadia and the Venerable Kimbala and said, "Come out, Venerable Sirs, come out. Our teacher, the Blessed One, has come." Then all 3 went to meet the Blessed One. One took his bowl and outer robe, one prepared a seat, and one set out water for washing the feet. The Blessed One sat down on the seat made ready and washed his feet. Then those 3 venerable ones paid homage to the Blessed One and sat down at one side. When they were seated, the Blessed One said to them, "I hope you are all keeping well, Anuruddha. I hope you are comfortable. I hope you are not having any trouble getting alms food." "We are keeping well, Blessed One. We are comfortable, and we are not having any trouble getting alms food." "I hope, Anuruddha, that you are all living in concord with mutual appreciation, without disputing, blending like milk and water, viewing each other with kindly eyes." "Surely, Venerable Sir, we are living in concord with mutual appreciation, without disputing, blending like milk and water, viewing each other with kindly eyes." "But Anuruddha, how do you live thus?" "Venerable Sir, as to that, I think thus: it is a gain for me. It is a great gain for me that I'm living with such companions in the holy life. I maintain bodily acts of loving kindness towards those venerable ones, both openly and privately. I maintain verbal acts of loving kindness towards them, both openly and privately. I maintain mental acts of loving kindness towards them, both openly and privately. I consider, what should I not set aside what I wish to do, and do what these venerable ones wish to do? Then I set aside what I wish to do, and do what these venerable ones wish to do. We are different in body, Venerable Sir, but we are one in mind. The Venerable Nadia and the Venerable Kimbila each spoke likewise, adding, "That is how, Venerable Sir, we are living in concord, with mutual appreciation, without disputing, blending like milk and water, viewing each other with kindly eyes." And that is the way the Lord spoke. That would be a good sutra for at the entrance of this wonderful center. So that brings us slowly to the end of our weekend together. First of all, I hope it was of purpose to you. I hope it also gives you a taste of the meditation training, so you have some idea of what is, if you are interested in doing so, what this entails. That is, it's what I do every weekend, basically. Yeah. I was to say something about this, and you might have already done. Did you already do that? Yeah. No, I'm not sure. Anyway, I found, as we all do, that meditation can be pretty challenging. And I found always great comfort in meditating with others, especially with others that know what they're talking about. We don't always have to invent the wheel. To be taught by someone else how we make wheels might be a much better approach. Moreover, When we meditate together, when we are supported in our meditation, we can take our mind there where otherwise we better not venture or would not dare to venture. It is helpful to be made safe by someone else. So I devised this meditation training initially in conversation both with Rinpoche and with the students of the Maitreya Institute, because I wanted to create something that was for the students rather than for the doctrine itself. So rather than wrapping students around the doctrine, I wanted to wrap the doctrine around students. And so it's a 4-year training that unfolds together with the community that we are practicing with at the moment. So even me, I don't always know exactly where we're going because we're going there together. So I always bring it together a lot of text, have it translated into French, and then I have to figure out myself what are we using of it and what we are not. Yeah. 2 aspects of that are important is that the purpose is that you can do it in any way that suits you. So there's a whole website built for it. We're now in the 3rd year, and I still have students doing the 1st year. So for those that need more time, that have less time to listen to the meditations and the teachings, then that is entirely fine. They can do it in whatever pace suits them. And the teachings are always live, either online or in the center, but they can be followed also indirectly. Of the 300 people that are currently enrolled, yesterday there was about half present. And so the other half does it the day later or in the weekends or in bits and pieces because you need to pack a punch in an hour and a half. So some of them prefer to take the punch over many days rather than an hour and a half in one single go. But it also means that the participants in this training have access to both my email and my WhatsApp, so that if you have questions, you can ask them so that you don't have to muddle around in the dark. Yeah. And we've seen over and over this weekend as well that our language is a handicapped guide to meditation. Yeah, it is as fallible as it is informative. And there is no other way. But in that sense, it's good to have generalized instructions that are always adopted to the students. Or my conversations with all the students give me an idea of where everyone more or less is. And so I adapt the approach in a certain meditation, certain teachings to what I found the group to be at, so that we move forward together. But then still, if things are not clear, or if problems arise, or if things are not turning out as they should be, then you're always more than welcome to ask questions and to seek personal guidance. My initial idea was to have a 20-year program, and then the educational department laughed. Yeah. So I scaled it down to 4. But there is no exam, there's no review, there's nothing at the end. That's not the purpose. The purpose is to find freedom. And so the idea is simply to do it again and again and again and again until it works. Moreover, that idea came also from one of my own teachers, who was taught by her own teacher by always on a regular basis starting from scratch. And she practiced both with His Holiness and a teacher in Burma. And her teacher in Burma, after training her for a while, would always send her to get medicine in Yangon. And when she would come back, he would make her start from the beginning, wherever she was. And he did it over and over and over with her until it became intuitive. And at one point, her mind just could do the whole stretch quite on its own. She became so familiar with the whole path that the mind became easy. That was the whole point. And that is also nice of going around these 4 years again and again. We go back to scratch, begin to the basis, and then we work our whole way up, all the way to Mahamudra and Kriya Tantra. When we have a good grasp on that, we let it go and we start from the beginning. Yeah. That is a very good way to train the mind. And then the foundation will be informed by the roof, as it were, and vice versa. Yeah. And so in that context, I'm truly a mendicant nowadays. And the point of that is that we see each other annually. So the agenda for next year is already ready, and I will be here in October, I think the first week of October, if I'm not mistaken. And so then we see each other again. So we may practice calmly in our own pace until it's finished. That is the purpose. Yeah. So that you can do that really, and I mean really that you don't have to live up to anyone's expectations. There's no purpose in that. So to do it as long as you need to, and find within that context to find your own way, and your mind will find the way. Yeah. So you're invited, and otherwise we will see each other for another weekend next year or so. Yeah. So having said that, then I would like to express my gratitude for you being here. To spend a weekend like this together is, well, it's extremely enjoyable. I think we did Anuruddha justice. Yeah, isn't it? So the question here to avoid you having to get up is whether or not you can start now. That depends a bit on how much understanding of the Dharma you have. So the years are relatively independent. So we are about to finish the first term. And so at the moment we're meditating on compassion, exchanging self and others. So an option would be is to use because it will stop in December and January for 2 months. In January I always lead longer retreats. And in January I'm in retreat myself. And so it gives you 2 months to pick up on the previous teachings of this module. And we always start first of all with calm abiding. And this year I just gave an overview of what we had looked at before. So I guided, I think, 2 or 3 weeks on Theravada versions of calm abiding, and then the same amount of time on Asanga's description of calm abiding. And ever since we've been working on motivation. That's always the first module to build these two things as a ground for the rest. And then the second part of the year, the last 2 modules are on insight meditation. And so we start with very beginning, like realizing that the self of the person is empty of being permanent, unitary, and independent. And the second year we looked at Yogacara, that the world is mind dependent. Yogacara, language, philosophy, and so on and so forth, and we meditate on that. And this year is Madhyamika, and then next year we will do Mahamudra and Kriya Tantra. So you can step in, but it would at least be good then to re-listen the earlier teachings of this year. And so far, I think there's about 10 or so. Yeah. My pleasure. Yeah. I want to do some prayers before conjurer prayers. I prefer prayers over praises. Page 11, here it comes. Yeah. May whatever virtue we have collected benefit the teachings and all transmigratory beings, and may it especially cause the essence of perfect pure Losang Dharpa's teachings to shine forever. May all sentient beings be graced with the bodhisattva way of life by the virtue we have obtained while practicing the bodhisattva's path. For our merit, may all those in all directions who are afflicted by bodily and mental sufferings obtain oceans of joy and contentment. As long as the cycle of existence lasts, may their happiness never decline. May the world attain the constant joy of the bodhisattvas. To this merit of ours, may all beings, without exception, abstain from every vice and always engage in virtue, not lacking the spirit of awakening, devoted to the bodhisattva way of life, embraced by the Buddhas and freed of the deeds of Maras. May monasteries be well established, full of chanting and study. May there always be harmony among the Sangha, and may the purpose of the Sangha be accomplished. May the Bodhisattva's wishes for the welfare of the world be fulfilled, and whatever the protectors intend for sentient beings, may that be accomplished. May the Pracheka Buddhas and Shravakas be happy, always worshipped by the lofty gods, assurers, and humans. May we live endowed with strength in whatever posture we are, In all our lives, may we find plentiful places of solitude. When we wish to see or ask something, may we receive the protector Manyuta himself without any impediment. May our way of life be like that of Manjushri, who lives to accomplish the benefit of all sentient beings throughout the 10 directions. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may we too remain and dispel the miseries of the world. This ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with marmero for continents, the sun and the moon, we imagine as a Buddha land and offer it. May all transmigratory beings enjoy this pure land. May our perfect pure gurus be life be long, and his or word-wide actions flourish in the 10 directions. May the torch of the teachings of Losang always remain, dispelling the darkness of the transmigratory beings of the 3 levels. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Neyatayami. Incomparably kind as supreme dancing Yaso, the wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, may you have a long life and all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. Save the land of Snow's teachings and transmigratory beings, who extensively clarifies the path that unifies emptiness and compassion. To the lotus holder Tenzin Gyatso we beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All-powerful Chenrezi Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. Peerless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pracheka Buddhas, victorious Losang father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now, holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice. You wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable Venerable Guru, to you we make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and from other living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss. Nevertheless, to the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the 3 jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortune disciples. One further on, due to this virtue, may we quickly become Guru Buddhas and lead all transmigratory beings without exception to that state. May the precious view of emptiness not yet born arise. May that arisen not decline, but increase more and more. Due to all the past, present, and future merits collected by us, the numberless Buddhas and the numberless sentient beings, which are completely empty of existing from their own side, may we, who are completely empty of existing from our own side, achieve a state of full enlightenment, which is completely empty of existing from its own side, and lead all sentient beings who are completely empty of existing from their own side to that state which is completely empty of existing from its own side, by ourselves alone who are completely empty of existing from our own side. We fully dedicate all these virtues to be able to train just like the hero Manjushri, who knows reality, and just like Samantrabhadra as well. We fully dedicate all our roots of virtue with a dedication praised as the best, by all the gone beyond victorious ones of the 3 times, in order to have good conduct. For the Dharma King Tsongkhapa's way of Dharma to flourish, may all signs of obstacles be pacified and all conducive conditions be complete. Due to the 2 types of merits of the 3 times of ourselves and others, may the teachings of the victorious one Losang Drapa shine resplendent forever. And to add one thing to this is, now, if ever you find a moment of your mind that is discouraged, and realize how few pursue the path of the Buddha. There's a lot of them talking about it. The fact that you came here, you sacrificed an entire weekend in your busy schedule to dream and to hope and to wish that one day we may ourselves turn the wheel of Dharma is extraordinary. So if you have a difficult day, think about that. You are the pinnacle of spirituality. May you find freedom soon.
Before I start, I just wanted to give heads up to our online community that there will be kata offering, and as always, there will be a kata offering opportunity also for you. So please get ready while I'm speaking. And I wanted to also thank you all online for joining us. I think it's always more difficult to follow the teaching online, and you've done it. You have spent the whole weekend with us, and we really felt empowered by your presence. So thank you so much for sticking with us, and also thank you everyone here in the Gompa for being here, because I think we all make it special in our own way. Every one of you brought your energy and your attitude, your dreamy mind into this event and made it special. I think that in the Gompa and also out on the corridors, this attitude of caring for one another was so palpable. I saw so many of you hugging each other and holding each other's hands while you were sharing and crying together. It's just so beautiful to see how we can form this kind of beautiful chosen family in a way. It's a true inspiration to me. And thank you for being here for everyone else. Please keep coming because you keep the center going. And also huge thanks to all the volunteers who day in, day out make it possible to run the center. We had another bumpy weekend with water out here in the center, and somehow we hardly felt it because somebody got some water, somebody else went to the store, got some drinking water. We still had our teas and still used the toilets and all, and everything went so well. But beyond that, the planning of it, the website maintenance, building maintenance, and videos that are put on the website, it's all done by the hands of volunteers. And I just wanted to express my gratitude because without you, nothing would be happening here. And thank you so much. And thank you, of course, Venerable Dondrup, our true director, for making it all possible. This is a big building and a big center, and it's all on the shoulders of this humble man at the back. Thank you so much, Venerable. And also people who do the altar, I wanted to say it's just so much work, and it's always looking so beautiful with flowers, with water bowls and everything else. Just there's no way for me to express how many hands and minds are put together to make the center run. So if I'm talking to you, and thank you also the members of our centers, because you keep the lights on, and that's not so easy to keep the center going. So you help us, all those who come once, all those who come many times. We are just so grateful for you because you are who we are doing it for. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Venerable Gendun, you just thanked us for a weekend spent with the Dharma, dreaming and working to become a Buddha. What a great act of generosity to be doing it all your life. You've spent, since very young age, countless hours on the cushion, countless hours in teachings, countless hours contemplating, reading. Now putting the program together, which seems so effortless, but I am sure that in the background there's so much work going into it. Traveling the world, not even having a home, so that you can spend time with the different communities around the world. All that to put my husband Jeff on the altar. Thanks so much. Jokes aside, all that to put us all on the altar and put all sentient beings on the path. There's no words of gratitude that can be said for that. Venerable, we are deeply grateful. It was an incredible weekend with tears, with a lot of wisdom passed on to us, with giving us a glimpse of what our minds are capable of, and taking us on a trip that maybe some of us have never been to before. Thank you so much, Venerable. And I'm speaking here for myself. Maybe everybody else will disagree, but I feel like I still have some work to do. So I'm very, very grateful. I'm very grateful that it wasn't just a one-off, and that you are doing the weekly teachings and also are planning to come back here. And you said during your teachings that, once we realize that there is no self, suddenly everybody becomes a part of ourselves. And I think when you decide that there is no home in this world, maybe every place becomes a home. So I just wanted to say that from our side, we definitely want to be one of the places you call your home. And we're so happy that you're coming back. And please know that there's a family at this home. So our community is waiting and looking forward and counting the days to next October. You're always so welcome here, Venerable. Thank you so much for everything you have done for us. And while everyone is waiting, please don't forget about Venerable's last teaching here on this coming Tuesday. So either online or here in the Gompa. Don't forget to join us, 7 p.m.